Okay, here we are, approaching the 7th week of Dragonflight Season 2. Before anything else, I'll start with the 3 tech talks of the week. And forgive me, I'm running out of good tips. The first tech talk is in Brackenhide Hollow, specifically the first part before the first boss. In this part of the dungeon, you need to free 5 captive Zskarn from their cages. All of the cages in the area are guarded by a set of gnolls, usually. There is one cage in particular that is way off in the corner that you can pick up without pulling any mobs. To do this, you'll need a priest, and the priest will need to use their Soothe ability. If you Soothe the 2 gnolls standing next to the cage, the priest can simply walk up, open the cage, and walk away. No threat, no aggro, and more importantly, no wasted time on small packs. It's not super game-breaking, but it will save you time if you use it appropriately. The second tech is yet again in Brackenhide Hollow and has to do with the second boss, Treemouth. As you may know, when the boss's energy bar hits 100%, he'll suck all players in, and any players caught in his circle will be eaten. After he eats somebody, he'll receive a shield that's of reasonable size. If you manage to break the shield early, he will spit the player out early. A nifty trick you can do here that I'm sure you've already been doing is let a player with an immunity get sucked in. It is crucial that this player does not use their immunity before they get sucked in, as with the case with Paladin's Divine Shield, if you use it before you get sucked in, the boss won't eat you and he'll be enraged. And when the boss gets enraged, the fight becomes considerably more difficult. Anyway, becoming immune while you're inside the boss will cause the boss to immediately spit you out, immediately removing the shield and skipping the phase entirely. Additionally, the player that used the immunity will not receive the debuff, so if you really must, they can go in multiple times. This may be relevant for classes that can use an immunity multiple times, such as Frost Mage. Think of doing this trick like removing 5% of the boss's health bar. By immediately removing the shield, you're increasing your uptime on the boss's actual health. And now for the final tech. This one is pretty lame. It has to do with the Refty defenders you find in the first area in Halls of Infusion. These mobs can be particularly dangerous with their demoralizing shout, reducing the damage of your entire party, and their frontal, Spear Flurry. This Spear Flurry is significantly dangerous, dealing a significant amount of damage over its duration. What's worse is that they're impossible to see. There are no ground effects, and the only way you can see it happening is to watch where they're facing and their cast bar. Thing is, you want your entire party to dodge these bleeds, including your tank. When the defender casts Spear Flurry, all the tank has to do is either move back slightly or move to the side. Of course, the difficulty here is that when the tank moves aside to dodge the bleed, they might inadvertently direct another bleed towards a DPS. So if your tank opts to dodge the bleeds, which they should, melee DPS should beware at where the tank is facing the mobs. These kind of things you might not notice as much as a DPS, but as a healer, you can feel it. Okay, that's the tech talk out of the way, so let's talk about the updates over the past week. As usual, we'll try and do them sequentially, but my bookkeeping system isn't exactly the best. The first is a set of nerfs to Brackenhide Hollow and Zkarn. This nerf to Brackenhide Hollow is actually a tip I was going to put like next week, but they patched it out, so not much a tip anymore. It's kind of an exploit. After the first boss on the right path, there are these big trees that spawn little Lashers. Usually, summoned units don't give trash count, and for good reason. You don't want to just farm them over and over again. These Lashers did give count. That was patched, and put quite a kink in a lot of top routes, because most routes would pad their count with these Lashers. A bit of a shakeup on the top level of Mythic Plus. But it is technically exploiting a bug, so it's not entirely bad that they patched it. It does feel bad though. And the other nerf for the week is Zkarn. After they patched Zkarn's cheat spot, Zkarn has been significantly harder than he was in the past. So Blizzard opted to make the fight easier by changing a few things, mostly to do with traps, and a little bit about Blast Wave. There were some other smaller minor hotfixes that I'll briefly flash up but are really not very important. That pretty much covers all the updates for live. It's pretty slim pickings. Well, there is one more thing that's happened on the live server. That's the Diablo event. And for the duration of this event, you'll receive 50% more experience. Great for leveling alts or maybe reputation you want from previous expansions. It does buff reputation by 50% as well, but it doesn't buff the Loam Nifton reputation, which is kinda lame, but whatever. I might level up a second mage. Why? I'll tell you later. Okay, I'm sure you've heard it by now, but there's actually pretty big news on the PTR front. Specifically, that they're nerfing DPS Primordial Stones by 40% in the next 0.5 patch. That pretty much makes them useless for that patch and any patch onwards. Of course, they understand that this is a reasonable damage loss for several classes. So they've opted to give basically any spec that uses it a flat damage buff. There's quite a few, so I'll just speed through them very quickly. Blood Death Knight, Vengeance Demon Hunter, Guardian Druid, Restoration Druid, Preservation Evoker, all 3 Monk specs, I think all 3 Paladin specs, Discipline and Holy Priest, Subtlety Rogues, Restoration Shamans, and Protection Warriors. You might notice that most of these are healers and tanks, and that's because Primordial Stones are flat damage, so healers and tanks benefit more from it. Other specs like Windwalker Monk don't value stats as much as other specs, so much so that they'd prefer Primordial Stone effects over a stat ring. That's pretty much the only big change on PTR this week. There is still more iteration on Frost Mage, Holy Paladin, and Evoker generally. If any of that interests you, feel free to look at the notes yourself. And that's that for the updates this week, and let's talk about my week in WoW. It seems the quietness that came with Diablo 4's release and our achieving of AOTC has persisted. Unfortunately, as expected, we did not get anywhere near 20 people for the raid on Wednesday. And the raid on Sunday was no better. The guild is dead quiet. We've discussed what may have caused this in previous weeks, but it seems that player retention this patch just isn't as good as other patches. Just 6 weeks in and nothing. That said, I'm still having some fun doing keys with my group. We're slowly moving our way through 21s, making sure we don't get whiplash from jumping too many key levels. We're not the best players, and we won't pretend we are. Just here to have fun and smash some keys. So I brought it up a little earlier, but I think I'm going to level up a second mage. And that's for one and only one reason. Right before this patch, I made a vow to only ever play Fire Mage for this patch, at least. And that means, out of principle and out of integrity, I cannot change my mage to Arcane Mage. I played a bit of Arcane Mage in Season 1, and I think I was pretty good at it. And I want to give it another go, but I can't because I told myself I wouldn't. And if I change my spec now, I'd be violating my vow, and that's just not something I want to do. So I'm going to level up a second mage. It's going to be an Arcane Mage, and it's going to be only ever an Arcane Mage. Just a little fun thing I want to do. That pretty much covers my week in WoW. It's been pretty quiet. I've been spending a fair amount of my off time playing The Witcher 3, having pretty good fun. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, be sure to leave a like or subscribe, and I'll catch you in my next weekly WoW recap.